So what I want you to do is I want you to go into your store.js. So I guess I didn't talk about what compose is here. This is us augmenting the abilities of Redux by handing it a middleware, right? This middleware just intercepts all of the actions and feeds it into the dev tools. That's all this bit of code is doing, right? We're going to hand it another middleware, which is going to make Redux able to deal with thunks. So what I want you to do up here is import thunk from redux-thunk. And then down here, you're going to say inside of the compose function, apply middleware. So I guess I have to go import that as well. Apply middleware, thunk. And up here, we're going to also have to get apply middleware. Yep. So just, you have to get apply middleware, you have to import thunk, and then you have to apply the middleware in compose. Okay. Now we're going to have to create two different two different action creators. We're going to have to create an action creator that actually goes out and makes the request, right, the thunk part. Then we're going to have another type of action that actually takes the result of that and feeds it into Redux as an action, right? So we need the thunk and the actual action that's going to get dispatched. And I'll show you what that means. So first thing, let's go to action.js. And we're going to create a new type of function or constant here, which is going to be add API data. That's going to be add API data. And we'll finally get rid of that stupid ESLint error. OK. And now I want you to go into types. And we're going to make another type of type. So action type will either be able to be set search term or add API data. OK. No, close. And then here, down where we're exporting the action, down here, we're going to make another type of action T. So what are we going to get back from the API? Well, in fact, let's actually go run it. Our API, I still have it running, but if you need a refresher, it's just yarn API. And then if I go to localhost 3000/some valid ID, so this is for master of none. What does this look like? Well, it looks like a show, right? It's the same show. It's actually literally the show object because that's where I'm reading it from. So it's going to be, the action type is going to be add API data. What is the payload type going to be? Show, right? That's what the payload's going to be. So this is going to be add API data, comma, space, show, right? Because the payload type is going to be show. Does that make sense? Now, we're going to have to do one thing up here to show, because if you look over here, it's getting one more thing, which is the rating, right? So we're just going to add that into our show type. And that's going to be a string. You don't want it to be a number in this particular case, because we want it to be like 9.0. And if you make it a number, it's going to drop the 0.0, right? So you want the ratings to always have that. So we're just going to keep it as a string. Let's see, make sure I get that right. OK. And actually, this is going to be a maybe type, because we're not always going to get the rating back. That's only going to be back from the API. And when we preload it on the side, it's not going to come with rating data. So we're going to make that rating data a maybe type. OK. Now let's go back to reducers. Okay, we're going to import add API data. So again, just to be clear, right now everything that we're doing is just the synchronous normal action types. We haven't done anything asynchronous yet. So we have const search term here, and then what we're going to have here is const API data. The default state of this is going to be an empty object, and the action is going to be, of course, an action. So how are we going to store this API data? I found a useful way to do this is to store it with as a key value store, right? Because every time we go to the API, we want to store it in a way that we can easily retrieve it. So we're going to store it with in an object where the IMDb ID is actually going to be the key, and the value of that is going to be the show object, right? So that way, in the future, if I navigate to Orange is the New Black, and then I back out of it, and then I go back to Orange is the New Black, I can just get the data out of Redux, and I don't have to request it again from the API, right? Does that make sense? Maybe not. No, OK. OK, I saw some head shakes, so we're going with yes, it makes sense. OK. So the first thing you're going to do is, just like in search term, you're going to say if action.type triple equals add API data. So another thing that we're kind of doing here behind the scenes, which you may not have noticed, is this is another type refinement here, which I think is pretty clever. So as soon as I establish that action.type is triple equal to add API data, what do I know about the payload? I know for a fact the payload is going to be a show. So I can start saying like action.payload.rating, and my type checker is like, cool, I know that's going to be there because you checked to see if the type was an add API data. It is, cool, I know exactly what payload is. By the same token, I can say like return action.payload.to uppercase here, right? This is not going to fail because this knows like that's a string. I know that's a string. Whereas if I try and say like map, right? I don't think that's a function on strings. It's going to say, hey, action payload's a string and it doesn't have a map feature on it. So that's cool. That's how we're able to do that. This is a type refinement right here, kind of happening behind the scenes. I think it's cool. You can disagree with me. You're just wrong. That's all. Just kidding. OK, so what we're going to do here is we're going to return, if it is in fact add API data is the action type, we're going to do object.assign empty object, new object, right? State, so we're going to keep everything that we had before. Then we're going to return a new object. So what we want is the key here to be whatever the IMDb ID of the new thing that we got. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to say action.payload.imdb ID. These square brackets around it mean I want this to actually be what it is, right? So action.payload.imdb ID, it's going to take that string and make that the key, okay? Then we'll say colon action.payload. This would have been similar, like if you wanted to do it a different way, const key equals action.payload.imdb ID, and then you could have said const object equals new object. You could have said object key equals action.payload, right? And now object would be what you would put here. This is just the new ES6 way of doing dynamic keys, right? Or dynamic, key names. Does that make sense? OK, cool. OK, and then if it's not an add API data action, what do we do? Just return whatever was there. Okay, then down here, the name of our key in our state is going to be called API data, right? So we could just do comma API data. Cool. So that's the reducer. Now we're set up to be storing these API data results.